Hey, what's up, brand builders? In today's video, I'll be talking about how to become a brand story expert. Now, I will talk about what a brand story is, what it is not, and then how you can become an expert. Because becoming a brand story expert, if you're running a business, if you represent a brand, if you are working with anything to do with target audience, consumers, sales, a brand story is critical for success. In fact, most of the brands struggling out there, most of the businesses struggling out there are doing so because of a lack of a consistent brand story. So first of all, let's just get some confusion out of the way, right? There is a confusion between brand story and origin story. These are two different things. Most businesses or most brand owners think that their origin story is their brand story. While technically it might work, an origin story might work as a brand story, it is not recommended. In fact, I would say that personally, strongly, I recommend not to use your origin story as your brand story. Your origin story is how this business came about, how your brand was built, how you, if you're the stakeholder, if you're the founder of that business or brand, how you came up with that idea. What happened that led to you, launching that business and launching that brand and building that brand, all that. That is the origin story. Now, there is a place for origin story, of course. An origin story needs to be told. Your audience, your potential consumers, they need to be aware of your audience story, but it should not be confused with a brand story. So, what is a brand story? Now, a brand story is anything that aligns with the worldview of your target audience, right? So it is a story that takes your audience on a journey that they're already on. Okay, a little confusing, but let me explain. So a brand story is a cohesive, consistent narrative that is that is made up of the need to satisfy with your product or service, the feelings you generate in consumers when they use your product or service, the truth about who you are as a company, as a business, and the values you uphold. So these are almost like the basics of what a brand story is. Now, unlike advertising, which is about generating consumer purchase intent by highlighting features and benefits of your product or service, a brand story is about generating a broad spectrum of emotions with the intent of creating a bond between the consumer and the company. So it is about creating an emotional bond, right? So what are stories? Now, why do we like, for example, movies? Why do we watch movies? Why do we read books? Our whole entertainment is made up of stories, right? When you meet someone, when you meet a friend after a long time, what do? You exchange stories. You're excitedly telling them about what's happening in your life. They are excitedly telling you about what's happening in their lives. And you are very interested. You don't know what's going on around you, right? You're like an animated conversation. So what's happening there? Stories. This goes back thousands of years, right? People used to gather around campfires, even during the caveman days, and then, later through history. It was about storytelling. People used to tell stories, and we still do it now. Our entire entertainment system is made up of telling stories. Our entire businesses are made up of stories. Why do we like a particular brand? Yes, of course, we like their products, maybe we like their services, but more than that, we like the story they're telling, right? So a brand story is a story that is told to your target audience about emotions that they care about things that they care about, not about your service, right? Not about your product. That is marketing. That's a separate thing. Now, I know marketing gurus out there, branding gurus out there may not agree with me. They might say, well, hang on, marketing is storytelling, or rather storytelling is marketing. I would beg to differ, right? I make the distinction between brand storytelling and marketing. Marketing where you are talking about the features and the benefits of your products or services, and then brand storytelling, which is a separate thing where you're not really talking about, maybe you reference your service, maybe you reference your products, maybe you give some context, but predominantly you're taking your audience on a journey, an emotional journey that they care about, right? That they are invested in. Let me give you an example. At Spellbrand, which is the branding agency that I founded and which I run as a CEO, we have an origin story, of course. The origin story is how I and a partner sort of, came with this idea of disrupting, even back then, 20 years ago, disrupting the kind of branding and advertising landscape, and how we started this graphic design firm, and then the realities of business and life set in, and we had to run it as a kind of a sweatshop, so to speak. But how we also then realized, and how I realized the importance of branding, and then pivoted the graphic design firm into a branding agency, blah blah blah. And there were lots of drama in that story where we almost went bankrupt, and then I sort of took the company from the ashes and turned it into $1 million business, and so on and so forth. So that's our origin story. And if you look at our website, or if you look at any of the videos I do, well, except this one, or social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, but I hardly ever talk about that. In fact, 99% of the time, I don't talk about the origin story. There is a place for that. We do mention that, on our website, where it'll be very difficult to find where I mention that. But most of the time, the brand story we tell is about one of our core values, which is sharing knowledge, sharing information, helping startups, helping business owners, helping entrepreneurs build brands. And we do that through sharing knowledge, right? Not through our services. Yes, of course, we have brand strategy services. We have services where we build brands, but most of the story we tell is about sharing. And in fact, that is our brand story, because that is what our consumers, or rather our target audience, cares about. They don't care about our services. They don't care about what we do as a company, but they care about building a brand. And that is one of the core values, and we tell the story of that core value. We share information, and as we share the information, we are telling a story. Okay, so maybe it's not a great example of what a brand story is, but I think it is very, in fact, I think looking at a complicated brand story implementation would benefit you. If you understand how we do it, how we tell our brand story, how we tell the brand story, I think it would benefit you in understanding what brand story is about, right? Okay, so how do you tell an effective brand story, and how do you become a master storyteller in terms of brand story, right? Let's look at a few kind of tips and tricks on how to do that. Okay, the first thing to remember is to know your medium, right? Now, knowing your medium means that sometimes you might, write content. Other times, a video may be the way to go, right? So the content that you produce when creating the kind of brand story, you should always know why you're using a particular medium. Now, understand the medium that you need to tell your story in, and then research the tools, find the best tool. If it is, of course, written content, then your blog or Medium could be a fantastic way of going about it. If it's video, then of course YouTube, Vimeo, These could be the platforms that you use, but always keep in mind that technology is advancing. So keep your eye out for technology. Keep your eye out for what kind of tools you could use, what you would benefit from. So keep your eye always on that, right? Next, know the key elements of the story, right? So like generally, powerful stories all have these fundamental elements: character, setting, plot, conflict, and resolution. Now you might say, okay, those are great for a movie, maybe a book, but how do they work with a brand story, right? Look, conflict is not more important than, say, plot or character, right? For example, imagine that Coke wanted to profit from one of their most notable missteps, right? So let's say they made a mistake. Then turning that loss into a win is very important. New Coke, when they launched New Coke, that was a kind of a conflict that they had. The conflict stemmed from the fact that Coke seemed to be out of touch with what their consumers really wanted. They just wanted a classic Coca-Cola experience, but Coke came up with New Coke, right? But they actually found a resolution, and Coke demonstrates through the story that they have a renewed commitment to staying in touch with what their fans really wanted. So the plot, setting, and characters are important. But if you don't have a clear idea of the conflict, you don't know what the reader really wants. So remember that your story needs to have all the components of a classic story, right? You need to have the character. Sometimes the character could be your customers or your target audience themselves. Make them the hero. Talk about something that they care about from their perspective, right? Which also aligns with your core values. So, for example, if you're selling financial services, right, then there is no point in talking about a brand story about, I don't know, a movie, unless, of course, it's related to finance. But keep your story from a finance perspective. What does your target audience care about? If they care about, let's say, savings, right, then a lot of people don't save, and that's something they always worry about. On the one hand, they want to spend money, they want to have a great life, they want to buy stuff, they want to enjoy, they want to go on travel, they want to go to restaurants, so on and so forth. But on the other hand, they know that they need to save money because, there could be an economic crisis. They might lose a job, right? They might fall ill, critically ill, or they might be worried about retirement and they need funds for retirement. So balance this out and tell a brand story. In fact, tell stories even if you don't provide any of those services, right? Let's say you're just an accountant, right? And financial management, saving for retirement is not something that you provide as a service, but your target audience cares about that. Tell a brand story that centers around, let's say, a pain point, and spend time and effort to provide value to your client. Down the line, when you build the trust, your clients will definitely take you up on the services that you do provide because they understand that you understand them, right? That you care about their pain points, and most of your stories, the brand stories, are built around that, right? Okay. Tell unique, valuable stories. Now, Ira Glass said this. People don't really tell you this, but often the amount of time finding a decent story is more than the amount of time it takes to produce the story, right? So he's the host of This American Life, and Ira, is hosted the show for more than 20 years, spends more than half of each week finding stories for the show. So look, remember, consumers are inundated with content, and a lot of these stories are actually just marketing messages disguised as content. But if you can rise above this temptation, if you strive to find and share the information that your customers really want, then you can step well ahead of your competition, right? So, like, even if you just curate other people's high quality content, you will become a resource for your consumers. And if you do it consistently, they will start considering you as their go-to resource. So this is where you're telling your brand story as well as their brand story, right? From their perspective. So spend time looking for stories, not news items. I don't mean stories in that way, but pain points can always be turned into stories. So get to know your audience well, understand them, understand their pain points, understand what they care about, understand their worldview, and then look for things, stories that can then align with those pain points and those worldviews of your consumers, right? Yeah, I know I keep repeating it because that is important. It's a simple thing. You know, there's no magic in becoming a brand storyteller, right? There's no magic. There's no silver bullet. It's a very simple thing. It's a simple concept, but people choose to ignore them because yes, it can be hard. Simple, but hard. Sometimes the simplest things are the hardest things. And there is nothing beyond this really. I mean, yeah, I do have a few more now kind of strategies and techniques, but if you can understand this one single thing, you are there. You know, you're 80% of the way there, which is understand your target audience, get to know their pain points, and then find stories that align with those pain points and those worldviews, and tell those stories in a medium of your choice or media of your choice. This could be written content. So you're writing a blog, you're writing on Medium, or it could be a video, right? Make a video, or it could be a podcast. You can tell your brand story in any way that you feel comfortable, and also in a way that your target audience would enjoy consuming and are available to consume, right? That's it really. I mean, I know the title, you might have read this title and said, how to become a master brand storyteller, and you probably thought there was a lot to it, but this is it. This is a simple thing. You just need to do it consistently. You need to make sure you're focused on what you're telling, the story you're telling, the brand story you're telling. And yes, do tell your origin story. Yes, do have marketing messages, marketing stories that you tell, which are different, right? They're focused around your product or service, but balance them out. 80% of the time, tell brand stories. 20% of the time, tell marketing stories. And within that marketing stories, maybe eke out maybe 2%, 3% of the time to tell your origin stories. Now, there is one caveat, there's one exception to this. If you are a brand that has a lot of heritage, a lot of legacy, then your origin story, yes, would become a predominant part of your brand story. It could probably be 50%, right? For example, Burberry. Now, Burberry has a lot of legacy, a lot of history, and therefore, a lot of their brand storytelling does include talking about their legacy and all that, and there's nothing wrong with that. What about Coke? Do you think because Coke has such a long history, do you think they should be talking about their origin story? Maybe not, right? McDonald's, yes, they have a little bit and they do talk a little bit about it, but not much. KFC, on the other hand, spends a long time, a lot of their brand story time talking about their origin, which is the colonel, right? Because there's a character. Now, if you have a character, then yes, you need to bring that character into your brand storytelling. The colonel, KFC, how he started, his recipes, and yes, and you might have seen the adverts now bringing the colonel back and making it stylish. And okay, you get the point. So if you have something like that, then yes, by all means, play with that. But if you don't, then stay away, or well, not stay away, but minimize your kind of origin story and things like that, right? I hope you found this video useful, and till my next video, take care.